people who built this amazing city 5,000 years ago were at the end of a cycle, not the beginning. But from my investigation, the big question is, just how far back does the Indus Valley culture go? Is it possible to trace it back to its source?
Just like this.
So it would be fair to say that the glory of this site is between 3000 BC and 2000 BC. Really.
Yes.
What about before 3000 BC?
Before 3000 BC, what was there, we do not know. There might not be any culture, possibly, or we may find in future some earlier phases as well.
But archaeologists have already found related sites in the foothills of the Himalayas that date back much further. They're simple farming settlements, hundreds of miles from the sea, near high mountains. Places that would have made a natural refuge for the survivors of the floods that I now know took place in northwest India at exactly the same time. Is it a coincidence that the ancient Indian tradition of Manu speaks of a flood that destroyed a former civilization and of survivors who retreated to the mountains to start again? The myth of Manu is part of a vast oral tradition that includes the Vedas, India's most ancient scriptures. Most experts think the Vedas were composed around 1500 BC, too late to shed any light on the then extinct Indus Valley civilization, and on our investigation. But might the experts be wrong? The Vedas are part of modern-day India, an oral tradition that's been memorized and handed down for more than 3,000 years. But if an oral tradition can survive for that long, why not for 6,000 or even 9,000 years? Could we find in the Vedas a clue to the missing link between the Indus Valley people and the end of the Ice Age? When the first Indus Valley sites were excavated in the early 20th century, the city of Daro revealed a startling new discovery.
I want you to imagine for a moment you are back in 1500 BC and are looking out over the straight streets and brick houses of Mohenjo-daro. Suddenly, smoke and flames begin to rise amongst them. And up one of the main streets there streams a horde of swordsmen led by a swaying figure in an outlandish chariot. The story I'm telling you is not fantasy. It is a literal interpretation of actual discovery. This is where one of the massacres took place.
Sir Mortimer Wheeler was one of the 20th century's most influential experts on the Indus Valley civilization and helped to shape the accepted view of its origin.
34 centuries after it happened, the archaeologists of the 20th century found these bones of the massacred, mute evidence of how an age-long civilization perished within the hour.
Wheeler was one of those who believed that groups of marauding nomads invaded India from the north and west around 1500 BC. According to this Aryan invasion theory, the Vedas were the scriptures of the nomads, not of the civilized people of the ancient Indus Valley cities. But when archaeologists inspected the skeletons more closely, the invasion theory was cast into doubt. Professor B.B. Lal was a student of Wheeler's at Mohenjo-daro, but questions the conclusions that Wheeler drew from the placing of the skeletons in different levels.
Some from the lower levels, some from the middle levels, some from the top levels. And some of them belong even to a period after the abandonment of the site. So when they don't belong to one and the same level, how can they belong to a massacre by invading Aryans?
In fact, they hadn't even died in battle. When examined, the skeletons had indeed come from different strata, meaning that they died at different times. The Aryan invasion theory should have died too. But since it was taught as established fact for most of the 20th century, it dies hard. Now, new linguistic evidence is also undermining the invasion theory. Leading archaeologists think it's likely that the language in which the Vedas are expressed has been evolving in India for more than 8,000 years, and so couldn't possibly have been introduced by Aryan invaders just 3,500 years ago. Perhaps it's time to consider a possibility that archaeologists still find unthinkable: that the Vedas are the scriptures of the Indus Valley civilization itself. I went to the Indian capital, Delhi, to discuss the problem with Dr. David Frawley, one of the very few Westerners recognized as a teacher of the Vedas.
So we have this wonderful culture, apparently, with no literature, nothing whatsoever. And then we have this wonderful literature, which is the largest in the ancient world. Exactly. And deep and sophisticated and incredibly well thought out. And no culture to attach it to. And they won't take the next step.
Even though they both come from the same area, they won't connect them.
The result, says Frawley, has been a huge missed chance to know more about the amazing Indus Valley civilization and to explore its mysterious origins.
The Vedas have been given to us as the literature of India, so they are connected with that culture. Now, if we put together, we see the image of a sophisticated culture of kings and rishis. We see in the seals, we see the symbols of spirituality, the symbols of yoga, the gods like Shiva. We see the whole basis of later Hindu civilization. That's what we should find as the culture itself has continued.
And I found an even more direct clue that links the Vedas with the ancient Indus Valley civilization. It's the image of the Indian flood survivor. In the Vedas, he's a long-haired mystic and a master of yoga. The image of just such a mystic, seated in a recognized yoga posture, turns out to be more than 4,700 years old, found at the Indus Valley site of Mohenjo-daro.
Slowly open your eyes. Hello, Mr. Graham. Nice to see you here. Welcome.
I have a question that I want to ask you, which concerns this ancient image. I'm wondering if you recognize this position.
This is called as Mula Bandhasana. It is said to be seated on the lowermost part of the body. He is trying to raise his energies up. Supposed to be a very difficult posture for the practitioners of yoga. In an advanced position, you try to slightly raise yourself and sit on the heels. And slowly you swing your legs like the wings of the butterfly and slowly bring it down. In due course, this comes down and touches the floor.
Right. Which is what we're seeing here, yes.
The seal tells us that yoga was being practiced in an advanced form nearly 5,000 years ago. How old do you believe yoga actually is?
Yoga, we believe, should be around 6,000 years old or even more.
Yeah.
Because there was one saint. He is said to have codified all this yoga into a form.
This is 6,000 years ago.
Yes, 6,000 years
that he
ago.
codified.
Yes.
Which means that it was existing
much before that. Take both your legs and take them behind.
Manu, the Vedic flood survivor, practiced yoga, and we now know the Indus Valley cities honored the image of a yogic sage. How big a leap is it from there to speculate that the Mohenjo-daro figure represents Manu himself, and that the Vedas must therefore have been known to the people of the Indus Valley civilization. Archaeologists too are noticing a lot of common ground.
You find a hierarchy of settlements. You find a hierarchy in their domestic architecture or even public architecture. They are finding the same kind of society, highly urban civilization.
What archaeology is doing is solving the puzzle of the origins of the Rig Veda.
Well, I think so, but it is still hotly debated subject.
I know it's a hot subject.
Vedic tradition, civilization was kick-started in India by survivors of a previous civilization from before the flood. Now geologists have discovered a lost river, which suggests the Vedas might have been composed by people who actually witnessed the end of the Great Ice Age. It's another sign that the myths deserve to be taken seriously as historical documents, and that they could be incredibly old. I'm looking for the lost Indian civilizations spoken of in flood myths. India's oldest civilization can be traced back to the end of the Ice Age, and is cheek by jowl with lands flooded at that time. The Rann of Kutch is one of the most inhospitable areas on Earth. But around the end of the Ice Age, a vast river flowed through it, making it rich and fertile. The river was the Saraswati, and it's repeatedly described in the ancient scriptures.
This river, Sarasvati, with foster and comes forth. The flood flows on, surpassing in majesty and might all other waters, pure in her course from the mountains to the ocean.
We don't see such a Sarasvati river today, but your remote sensing technology tells us more of the story.
The river Saraswati originated in the Himalayas and flowed down this channel, which is dried up. Still it can be made out.
With the latest satellite images, we can trace the original course of the river from the Ice Age glacier all the way to the ocean, just as the myth says.
You see here as the dark colored channels, it flowed parallel to the Indus River and took a southward turn, and further flowing it joined with the Rann of Kutch.
It seems to be a huge channel at this point.
More than 22 kilometers.
22
kilometers broad. It is described in the Vedas that it was mightiest river of that time.
Right. And that would be what sort of period?
Certainly the river was flowing 10,000 years and it continued up to say 6,000 years before present.
Because the Vedas described the Saraswati when it was in full flow, Dr. Gupta's confirmation that it stopped flowing 6,000 years ago has one obvious implication. At least some parts of the Vedas must have been composed earlier than 6,000 years ago, during what archaeologists call the pre-Harappan period that led up to the Indus Valley civilization.
Not only we have the ancient Saraswati river, what is extraordinary is that we find pre-Harappan settlements on the old Saraswati channel.
It's revolutionary enough to suggest that the Vedas could date back to the Indus Valley civilization. Today, however, more and more Indian scholars are reaching the view that they could be much older than that.
It is not only an issue of Harappan and Vedic civilizations being one and the same, but the fact that the Rigveda was predominantly pre-Harappan. Harappan civilization, somewhere I think I have called it twilight of the Vedic age. The Vedic age ended with the disintegration of the Harappan civilization.
And the most amazing discovery might date the Vedas to more than 11,000 years ago. Leading experts from the Geological Survey of India have argued that there are verses which literally depict the glacial meltdown at the end of the Ice Age.
I will declare the manly deeds of Indra. He slew the dragon, then disclosed the waters. The waters glided downward to the ocean, and many seas filled full with waters.
We do find in the Rigveda this dominant symbolism of Indra destroying the dragon who lives at the foot of the mountains and releasing the waters to flow into the sea. And this is very much an end of the Ice Age myth, where the great glaciers broke up and the whole area of North India became filled with great rivers and became a very area of habitation. So the symbolism is there of the cataclysm.